Hello and welcome to another episode of Queer Conversation. Today we have a very special guest joining us, the remarkable Loretta Smith, an author who is passionate about uncovering the stories of extraordinary women. Loretta is known for her first book, A Spanner in the Works, which tells the incredible story of Alice Anderson in Australia's first all-girl garage. Today, however, we're diving into her latest work, Corpus in Extremis, a memoir. This is not just any memoir. It's a deeply personal exploration of Loretta's experiences with osteogenesis imperfecta, also known as brittle bone disease. In Corpus in Extremis, Loretta takes us on a journey of what it is to reside in a body pushed to the extreme. She argues that nobody escapes being disabled, disenfranchised or othered in one way or another. It's an extraordinary story of survival and resilience, and we're thrilled to have the opportunity to discuss it with her today. So sit back, relax, and join us as we delve into the inspiring world of Loretta Smith and her latest book, Corpus in Extremis. Welcome to Queer Conversation. In the studio with me today is Loretta Smith.
Thanks, Silke. I'm still recovering from the book launch last night, but I've got the coffee, so I'm good to go.
You are an author, you're a feminist, you're an environmentalist, but you are known for one particular book.
There's a spanner in the works. Alice Anderson, who was the first woman in Australia to run an all-female motor garage in the 1920s. Yes, that's been a very popular book. And what I say to people about this memoir, Corpus in Extremis, is that I also write the backstory to writing A Spanner in the Works in it. So anyone who enjoyed A Spanner in the Works might be interested to know what I actually went through over the decade of getting that other book together.
So inspirational to think that some girls opened a garage back then in those days. Is it your second book?
It's my second traditionally published book, and it's called Corpus in Extremis, a memoir. I've made it quite philosophical. It's not just about me and my body, but I was born with a rare bone condition called osteogenesis imperfecta. And I have the mild version, but it's still, a disease, a condition, genetic condition that actually very much affects your life because it's colloquially known as brittle bone disease, but it's actually a collagen defect, and it means that you're born with bones that are weak and bendy and loose joints, and so you can have a lot of fractures. Some people might remember Stella Young, who was a disability advocate and up-and-coming comedian, and unfortunately she died. She's only in her early 30s in 2014, I think it was now. She had the more severe version of what I have. I still am able to walk around. I need a walking aid. I've had lots and lots of surgeries. So Corpus in Extremis, it's really about being human, living in our bodies and the kinds of extremes that we can experience as humans living our life. Writing a memoir on anything is kind of a crazy, brave thing to do, and I was more nervous about this one coming out because it's about me rather than somebody else. But it was interesting, while I was writing A Spanner in the Works, a lot of people were saying, "Why are you worrying about that woman? We want to hear about your story." And particularly, I'm the eldest of 5 children, and they all wanted to have a sense too of my experience and how I was affected in the family, and by extension how it affected them, I suppose. And I don't know, as a writer, sometimes you're just compelled to write something, and I think I wanted to praise it more broadly philosophically. And in the last chapter, I say that, some of us have obvious disabilities, some of us have invisible disabilities, but there's not a human being in the world that hasn't felt like they were an outsider or they've been othered in some way. And so just opening up the whole concept of, well, what is disability? And, a lot of people that do live with disabilities feel that ableist society is more of a problem than actually living with the disability, like lack of access and attitudes and people feeling that they can comment if you look a certain way or you're moving in a certain way. I mean, I've had so many people come up to me and say, "Oh, what happened to your foot?" Or, I've been on crutches and, did you have an accident? And I mean, that's absolutely fine. And it's a perfectly fine question to ask. But when it's something that's ongoing and I say, this is permanent for me, or this is why I behave this way, it does take a lot of energy to kind of explain yourself.
You also are saying, take this out of disability. What do you mean with that, Loretta?
More recently, we talk about what people can do, what people can't do. And so many people come up to me and they'll say, well, I have dyslexia, or endometriosis. I mean, I think there's a lot of stuff coming out now about women not being treated in the medical system in the way that men are, and most drugs are being tested on males because they don't have the hormonal fluctuations that women experience. And so I think that's also that political side of things. My federal MP, Jed Carney, actually launched a book last night, and of course she's the assistant health minister, but she also was a nurse, so she was perfect to launch it. And she brought up the misogyny that's in the book, because it is critical of certain systems, and doctors, particularly, my early life were all male. They didn't always treat me that well. And so Jed mentioned that, that the system still needs to really improve. I'm someone with my condition that's complex, and you're a small cog in a huge system. But I think talking about my experience is also helpful to the medical profession to actually see someone that, okay, I'm a lay person, but because I was born with this condition, I've built up a lot of knowledge over the time of being in and out of hospital, being a patient, and also being a case manager. Feel like my experience kind of resonates in a broader way. That's how I've tried to present the memoir. Because it's not a full autobiography, it's a memoir. And so a memoir is based around a particular theme. And the theme that I focused on was the body in every sense. And what happens to your psyche as well. Like the survival methods that I used, that I realised as an adult that I was using as a child. For example, they did not provide pain relief for children when I was born. I was born in the early 60s, and so I used to rock my head back and forth and sing in the hospital, and I realised that was a way of me kind of getting out of the pain that I was in. So that there's sort of that running through, but I had the idea I wanted to have separate self-contained stories that link. So it's more or less chronological, but there are themes through it. I have a lot of philosophical reflection in amongst that. And I talk a little bit about my family. I contextualise it, of course. But look, it's not just about pain and despair. It really is about how you can thrive against the odds. There's quite a bit of humour in there as well. It's dark humour, but people have said that they've cried and they've laughed out loud reading it. So I guess that covers the spectrum.
Can you explain to me a little bit what the disease actually, how it impacts your body? And you said it's a lifelong disease, right? You were born with this. What was your upbringing like with your disease?
Well, it meant that physically I was very fragile. There are different types of OI, osteogenesis imperfecta, based on the way the collagen behaves in your body. And as I said, I have a fairly mild version of it, but I was born with dislocated hips, which is not uncommon. But because of when I was born, and because the arrogant doctors did not listen to my mother, who said, look, my baby's standing up in the cot with one foot flat and one foot up, and the doctor just patted her on the head and said, young mother, go home. Mum was only in her early 20s when she had me, and she hadn't had a lot of education, and she trusted doctors. The dislocated hips meant they picked them up too late. I was about 12 months old, and so they tried to put them in the sockets. But, of course, if you've got bendy, breaky, soft bones, and you try to walk on dislocated hips, and I ended up walking, it meant everything else grew crooked, and it's meant that I've had to have lots and lots of surgeries. I spent a lot of time in hospital as a child, and I think that affected my immune system. I'm very sensitive to things because you're in this kind of sterile environment. I have a sister and a nephew with this condition as well, and the sorts of drugs that they have now, they're not great. There's no cure for this at this stage because it's a very complex, it's not just one genome that you can tweak and it fixes. The treatments really are just things like you'd have for osteoporosis. So we're all kind of on bone density treatments that can improve your bone density to a degree, but it doesn't cure it. And I've also had bone grafting because my bones were thin and weak and they didn't have enough to work with when they had to replace my hips, for example. But look, I was born with pain. I deal with chronic and acute pain. It's getting harder because I've had so many opioids over the years. I'm allergic to them all now. I have to kind of work really hard up here to just manage things. And it means that as I've aged, my mobility has decreased. But look, it's a fairly rare condition, 1 in 20,000. And some people are more or less, quote unquote, physically normal, or they look physically normal with it. And others are more extreme, like someone like Stella Young, who is a permanent wheelchair user. Sometimes with this condition, the bone density can increase on its own, and so I'm one of the lucky ones in that respect. I used to play the piano. I can't really play much anymore because I've got all this arthritis in my hands. So, there's all those sorts of things, but do you focus on that or do you focus on what you can do? I've got quite a few chapters where I've done quite a bit of overseas travel and achieved things that I didn't even think I could, but I did it. Just because you have a disability, or a physical disability in my instance, doesn't mean that you can't get out there and do stuff.
You have had a show with Joy FM.
On a weekly show on Saturdays on Joy called Take Me to Your Reader. We talk about writing and we interview guest authors, and I'm doing a lot more reading than I would have otherwise, and maybe reading books I wouldn't have naturally chosen for myself. And I find that really interesting too.
Thank you very much for speaking to us after your launch last night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us today on Queer Conversation. We hope that our discussions have enlightened you, challenged you, and perhaps even inspired you. Remember, every voice matters and every story is important. We are grateful to have you as part of our community, and we look forward to bringing you more insightful conversations in our next episode. Until then, stay safe, stay proud, and keep the conversation going. This is Queer Conversation. Signing off, goodbye and take care.